Thank you guys for being here. I think what I'd like to do right from the beginning is to do a pledge of allegiance. But it's an unusual one. I pledge allegiance to the earth and all the life which it supports. One planet, in our care, irreplaceable, with sustenance and respect for all. I want to give a shout out. I saw this on a poster at my local bike shop, so shout out to John Crandall for putting that poster up. I think it would be good, and I would really like to know just a little nugget about each of you. So let's do a very quick round robin. Try to keep it to maybe 30 seconds if you can, please, and tell us who you are and why you're here. The brief version. And then one last thing is, what is the very most important thing in the world to you? All right?
Sure. Josh Spodek. I'm coming in from Manhattan. I forget everything I was supposed to say, but what brings me here is that, oh man, lots of things. I mean, the environmental situation is dire, and we have a culture that is promoting the causes, but we believe that we're solving them. And so we're doubling down or increasing the situation. And I believe there's a role for government in reducing this problem, in helping us protect life, liberty, and property, for example. So what was the last thing? Like what's the
most important thing in the world to you?
Oh man. Well, in the context of government, protecting freedom, I'll say.
Okay. All right. Who's next?
Hi, this is Tony Povolitis. How are you doing, Dave? Good to see you.
I don't see you, Tony, but thanks for being here.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I've had some problems on my own machine here. But listen, as you know, I have a forum called Scale Down. It's on Facebook as well as Substack. And I would just say that safeguarding life on Mother Earth is my number one priority. So there you have it.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Hawks Johnson, and I am a marine biologist. I have a lot of experience with marine mammals and whales and environmental education, multiple years with environmental education, and things just are not getting better. Things are just spiraling. They're getting worse. Doesn't matter what we do, if we recycle or do anything like that. I feel like I'm running on a treadmill, and I am absolute desperate to solve this issue. And so I am completely on board with Dave's message. Population is the key driver to all of our environmental issues, every single one, and we can't solve it without addressing that. And that's why I'm here. And that's probably one of the most important things to me, because I want a healthy, wonderful, beautiful planet for my children and their children, if they choose to have them, and everybody and every species.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, next.
Sure, I'll go.
Hi, Molly.
Hi there. Well, my reason for being here was a little refined last night. I got some blood work back, some lab tests, and anything that was high out of the range of safe, most of it were environmental toxins. And I was startled. And then I had a conversation with my 12-year-old nephew, great nephew, last night. And after I hung up, I cried and just thought, what are we leaving them? What's he breathing? What's he drinking? What's he eating? And will he be as healthy as I hoped I was? So I have concerns.
All right. Who's next?
This is Tammy Jennings, and I'm just here as a citizen of the United States and the world, and praying that somehow we get this problem fixed. So I'm here for information.
Thanks, Tammy.
I'm Walter, retired Naval Intelligence Officer here in Southeast Virginia. I guess my important thing for me is to understand the reality that I find myself in, try to fit in and be as productive as I can within that reality.
Judith from Colorado Springs, longtime fan of Dan's. My major motive is my grandchildren, which is why I just moved to Northern California, which I have to say is way ahead of Colorado Springs. I'm pleased to say. I just was at a workshop yesterday all about climate resilience, and something has to happen. So I really appreciate everything Dave's done. I will say my church just did a year-long study of some Native American issues because we had a Native American speaker, and I still greatly admire the way that they've been able to live lightly on the land without destroying it. I think there are a lot of lessons to learn there.
Yep.
Come on, Dave.
We miss you, Judith. Thanks for being here. I think we still have a couple of people left.
Jan Mulder here from the Netherlands, Europe. Part of the team since they started. Beekeeper, animal lover, planet lover, and that's one of the best reason why I'm member of this and doing whatever I can.
And most important thing in the world to you?
Planet Earth.
Okay. If the rest of you don't want to speak, that's fine. I'll give you a couple seconds to jump in. All right. Those of you who I can see, so far I kind of get the impression that everybody would raise their hand, but let's just check. How many of you are aware that we're an ecological overshoot? Yeah. So this is the advanced class, and there's certainly some common themes in what everybody said about what's most important to them. And I kind of was hoping that I would hear something about your grandchildren or your kids. And I heard that a little bit. For some of you, it's the planet and all life on it. I see that as our common ground, as wanting to respect all the life on Earth and or wanting our kids to have a healthy planet and a decent shot at living a good life. And overshoot really threatens to give them a dead planet instead of a good life and a bright future. So the question in my mind that I'm constantly asking myself is, why aren't we acting like it's an emergency? Because it's an emergency. We're getting close to some serious tipping points beyond which it'll be really hard for us to come back, at least not in our lifetimes, the lifetimes of our kids. So why aren't we acting like an emergency? I'm just going to give you guys a couple thoughts, and then I really do want to just answer questions and have a good conversation here. I think that part of it is conventional wisdom, that people think that no one wants bad news. I get that a lot. I think people sometimes criticize the campaign and say, stop talking about a dead planet, stop talking about ecological overshoot, emergency, that's bad news, and people don't want bad news. Also, that it's a doomsday message. The conventional wisdom is nobody wants a doomsday message. That's a part of the reason why we don't get the truth from politicians, from scientists, college professors, school teachers, journalists. They all have a variety of little reasons why they don't give us the truth. Part of it is that conventional wisdom, the thinking that we want good news, we don't want bad news. Scientists and college professors, they need to have funding for their research projects. And I think in many cases that keeps them from being completely honest about what a dire emergency it is. Politicians don't feel like they have permission from us. They feel like they've got to promise us cheap gas, jobs, and a roaring economy. They don't have permission from us to talk about overpopulation or overshoot or scaling back on our robust economic growth. And they get their signals from us, from what we're talking about, how we're living our lives. Few of us are acting like it's an emergency. Journalists, especially, I am critical of journalists because I think they have a lot of power. I mean, what we get from journalists every day informs our lives. That's how a lot of us get our worldview. And almost all of them have been programmed from birth to believe that growth equals progress. It's a myth, but that's what they've been programmed to believe, and they're not open-minded and curious enough to to explore other possibilities. If they were curious, they would be calling this crazy presidential candidate Dave Gardner to find out what's the deal. You're promising to begin contracting the economy and the population. That's heresy. Tell me about this. I don't get that call from journalists. Stephanie, I see you raising your hands. I'll give you the floor.
Yes, I'm just raising my hand because, as you're talking, it's like, I just wanted to throw in there that no one wants to hear bad news, but I think there's so many of us. First of all, let me preface with, I go through my day sometimes in despair, complete and utter despair without any hope. But every time I hear something like the thoughts that I've just heard this meeting, as well as I just put in the chat a horrific movie called Humane, which is a film director that has directed this thing about overpopulation, and that we need that the contraction of 20% of our population by governments is going to be a requirement for and it's a horror film. But all these little bits and pieces is what I'm trying to say as I'm kind of jumping around here. All these little bits and pieces do give me hope. They give me hope that people are paying attention. The politicians aren't paying attention. They're ignoring it, but people are paying attention. And they're getting it. I really, truly feel that they're getting it. And I just want to give that little bit of hope and inspiration out to people that, yes, people are getting it. Now we'd have to hold our politicians accountable, and we have to elect people like you.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I watched Humane because you suggested that to me. And it really is a dark future. And we don't have to do that. We don't have to have a government edict and a quota and ask people to commit suicide in order to get human population back to a sustainable level. We've got a much more elegant way to do that, which is to really just embrace the trend that's already happening. Young couples making very informed decisions and choosing to be child-free or to have one child at most. We need to celebrate that, and we need to not buy the hand-wringing that we're seeing from growth profiteers and economists who are worried about fewer people, meaning a shrinking economy. The economy only needs to be big enough to meet the needs of the population that it serves. But back to this theme about being depressing news and doomsday scenarios. When we developed our campaign messaging, we considered that, and that's one reason why we felt like we really needed to have two sides here. We needed to make sure everyone understands there's an emergency, but also understands that we're putting together a plan here for a bright future. There is a possibility for a bright future. The problem is that to do the work, that's dramatic changes that we need to make. We need to really turn a lot of things upside down to have that bright future. And people need to understand that it's an emergency in order to change the way they behave, change the way they vote, give politicians permission to make dramatic changes. And, psychologists and social scientists tell us that we're more likely to act to prevent a loss than we are to act to get a gain. So the truth is, even though the conventional wisdom is nobody wants this doomsday message, the truth is that people are more likely to act if they're about to lose, their precious good life or a good life for their kids, if they just know it. So that's a challenge in front of us, and part of it, it's all about bystander behavior. As long as people think that that life is going to go on, they're going to be able to tee off at the country club tomorrow. They're going to be able to get groceries at the grocery store, and they won't be too incredibly expensive or scarce, and there'll be fresh water coming out of the tap. They don't think there's an emergency, and they look next door and their neighbors aren't acting like there's an emergency. So we need to somehow infect, let's start with the people of the United States, infect our friends, infect our neighbors with this sense of urgency, and that starts with just changing the way we behave ourselves. I see that. I'm far from perfect. I'm on a journey trying to improve my life and shrink my footprint. But my neighbors see me riding my bike downtown to meetings. My neighbors see me eliminating turf grass from my yard. My neighbors see me not using disposable plates and napkins and cups when we have them over for some kind of a gathering, and I see them changing their behavior. It's infectious. The place where we had my town hall at the Buffalo Lodge back in, I think that was in October, we had to bring in, all the plates and utensils and cloth napkins and everything so that there wouldn't be a lot of waste. But the owner of the lodge observed and took note. And so they're actually changing and trying to eliminate a lot of the one-time use disposable items there. So it can happen, but we need to find a way for it to happen a lot faster. And I figured, well, if we have a president of the United States who does a lot more than just put solar panels back on the roof of the White House, but every day talks about this emergency and starts implementing these programs to make it a lot more attractive to use active transportation and a lot less attractive to fly and overconsume, and also stops bragging if GDP goes up, but rather laments if GDP goes up, we're failing somehow, we can do better. That's really kind of what it's all about. Tony, I think, Stephanie, you had your hand up first, but you've spoken a couple times, so let's let Tony have a word or a question.
Yeah, Dave, on this matter of media, I think that the message has been pushed very heavily that things will be all right without reducing consumption, without degrowing the economy, and without doing much of anything about population overgrowth. And so to be able to penetrate that mindset and kind of break it up is something that obviously needs to be done. And I'm delighted you're making a stab at it with this trial balloon as a presidential candidate. But again, with the media, how do you get your message out? And I'm sure you thought a lot about this. Can you think of some ways in which we can help at least let people know that you are running for president and what you stand for?
That's a great question. Thank you so much for that question, Tony. That's the most important question I think here today is, what can you do? How can you help? Because the news media are ignoring us, we have to go around them, and there are ways to do that, fortunately. So we're using social media. I'm writing posts on Substack and creating YouTube videos and TikTok videos, in spite of the fact that TikTok is very frustrating for me, but that's a young audience that we need to reach. But it's not taking off, and partly it's because we haven't probably created the zaniest or most outrageous video or TikTok post yet, and we keep trying different experiments, and maybe we'll hit gold there. But one way to help is if we have an army. We need an army across the country of supporters who are watching what we do and what we post and liking those posts and sharing them with their friends and neighbors so that we can infect the country. It's almost like a multi-level marketing scheme. Let's say our campaign team is putting out some messages, and we have maybe we have 20 today, and maybe it's 50 next week with a little luck, real ardent supporters who really get this and really believe this. If you guys are watching us, making an extra effort to find, every day, go see what we've got on Facebook or YouTube or TikTok, and liking it, sharing it, commenting on it. So if each of you are getting the word to 10 of your friends, colleagues, families, and then if some of them get it and each of them spreads the word to 10 close colleagues, eventually, it's exponential growth. Eventually our message will be getting out there. Maybe that's happening, but my sense is I feel a little bit like I'm in a little echo chamber, and that a lot of you aren't noticing when we do something. Maybe there's something I can do better to make sure you know when there's something that could be shared.
Dave, have you thought about having a regularly scheduled program like on Rumble or YouTube. I notice there's a lot of people that are doing that. And that way, the people that are interested know there's a specific time and day that they can tune in and listen to you specifically, and learn why you are a presidential candidate and what the issues are. I think something like that. I know there's a lot of you are getting the message out in different forums, but I think that's something to explore if you haven't already thought about it. I mean, just give it a thought. Like if you were on every day or every other day at a certain time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Rumble, you could build an audience, and we would be able to refer people specifically to that Rumble platform that you're on. Just a thought for you.
Well, that's a great suggestion. That sounds pretty daunting in a way, but I like your thinking. And let me pause here.
You're not a guy. You're good looking too. I mean, let's go with it.
The people on TikTok think I'm too old, and that I ought to go ahead and volunteer in Humane to euthanize myself. This is a great conversation, and I'd like to have it, and I hope we can have it. But I want to make sure first, is there anyone here who doesn't really understand what we're talking about? What this emergency is, and what this campaign is proposing to do about it, rather than make this just a session to that it kind of sounds like a campaign team meeting, which is great. Is there anyone who needs a little bit more information about the emergency we're facing and what we're proposing to do? If there is, why don't you speak up or raise your hand, and we'll cover that first. Everybody gets it, we think? Okay, well then we can kind of keep making a to-do list. It'll be great if the to-do list isn't just mine, because I only have so many hours in a day. But I'm obviously very invested in this, and I want a bright future for your kids and everybody's kids, and for my two kids too. Okay, Stephanie, let's go to you because you've had your hand up for a while.
For sure. Thanks, you guys. This really kind of dovetails Tony's his question about your campaign. And as we know, there are population deniers out there, people that think that the human population numbers are just fine, and that we can grow, we can continue to grow. Some people with very large microphones, like our favorite Elon Musk dude. And it is an issue because if people don't have the right information in their hands and they think that we're okay, it obviously is a showstopper.
Sure.
Just like we were on, you got some horrid messages on TikTok, and that just totally overwhelms me a little bit. So how can every single one of us convince people that overpopulation is an issue, and maybe talk about that my wonderful thoughts about percentages of mammals and all that kind of stuff. How do we convince people that it is a problem? Because I sat with my daughter and explained it to her, and she finally got it. And she goes, "Oh, but it took me a while to get her to actually understand it, because she's lived in an overpopulated world, a very polluted world. Her baseline is really bad right now. How do we get people there?" That's my question.
Okay, and you know what? I think what I'd like to do is, Josh Spodek, can I put you on the spot and invite you to give us, maybe the 4-minute answer to that question from your perspective? Because you watch us, people like Stephanie and Dave Gardner, and we're putting out a lot of facts about overpopulation, and maybe we're not really getting through. Joshua is the host of this Sustainable Life podcast. It's a great podcast, and he's writing a book, and he's done TEDx talks, and he's doing a better job of living a low footprint life than I am. So I really want to salute you, Josh, and I want to give you a chance to maybe share your thoughts about Answer Stephanie's question. How can we overcome that, the ignorance about overpopulation, for example?
Well, thanks for the introduction. And I am trying to live sustainably, but I want to clarify that's really a distraction. I'm learning and practicing leadership skills. And to me, the idea of there's a model that I think we're working on that if people are given the right amount of facts, then they will choose to do the right thing, or that somehow facts motivate behavior. I don't think that is accurate. I think it's counterproductive. I find that the word convince, the vince in convince is vanquish. The same, it's like to defeat. And when we try to convince people, in my experience, it motivates them to argue back, and generally leads them to hold the beliefs that are driving their behavior stronger than before. Leadership is more about beliefs and stories and images and role models and culture. And I think that's where to focus. Tell a smoker about lung cancer. See if that gets them to stop smoking. It's generally not what does it. What does, it's a lot more listening. You got to meet people where they are. I can't give a lesson on leadership.
That sounds like a long-term project, like smokers. I mean, it took a long time. It took, restaurants and bars finally banning smoking, and it took people. It took friends giving up smoking. There couldn't be one campaign, and 12 months later, there's 50% fewer smokers, right?
And may I just jump in here too, because I do want to share something. I completely am on board with getting people to on your bandwagon in that way, in a storytelling way. And yeah, convincing may be not the right word, because you're right, Josh. I think that convincing, all of a sudden we do put up a barrier. I want to interject here because we're talking about smoking. My mom just died. She was a smoker. She just died of lung cancer. So in my opinion, if I take that parallel, that analogy, that's what's going to happen, unfortunately. We're in such a dire situation that we don't have necessarily time, the luxury of time to win people over that way. It's become so critical that, unfortunately, just like my mom died of cancer because she smoked her whole life, and I tried to convince her not to. And that's kind of where the planet is going too. And so I'm thinking we don't have time. So how do you address that, Josh and Dave? How do you address that we don't have time anymore to do that?
Having time or not having time doesn't make something more or less effective. The message that we're talking about here is not all that different from 1972's Limits to Growth. They gave out a lot of facts. I agree with a lot of what they came up with, but they didn't lead. It didn't work. We're saying all these other people out there should change because what they're doing isn't working, but we're not changing ourselves. To me, the most effective thing would be for us as individuals to learn leadership skills and to practice leadership skills. Because we want it to happen faster, it doesn't mean that it will work. If you push a system faster than it can move, it generally push back.
Josh, I think you're right, but let me push back in a little bit and see if there's a variation. If the people in New Orleans are told that there's a hurricane on track and it's going to have landfall in New Orleans and it's going to be a Category 4 hurricane, what is everybody out there doing? They're out there boarding up their windows and grabbing their dogs, and they're evacuating. They're acting like it's an emergency. They didn't need any stories to be told, I don't think. They needed leadership, but the kind of leadership they needed was, hey, emergency, hurricane on the way, landfall in 2 days. We've got to get the heck out of here. Is there a parallel to that for this?
We want people to see the world the way we see it, and they don't. They don't see it as if we can tell them you should see it the way we see it, But there's a lot of people out there and who have won elections, and I don't mean just the candidates, but the people who voted for them. To them, this message sounds like, I want power, and I'm going to scare you into giving me power, and I may never give it up. And for me to say, yeah, but it's a really serious emergency, that's what they hear. They're like, okay, I don't want to vote for you.
Well, if the people in New Orleans were voting for mayor today, and one candidate said, there's a hurricane in 2 days, and I'm going to declare an emergency, and we're going to, activate first responders, and the other candidate said, I don't believe that. Don't worry about it. Nothing to see here. Don't you think everybody would vote for the candidate who was telling them the truth? I'm just playing devil's advocate here a little bit. I'm just trying to get a good picture of what leadership looks like in this.
There's a lot of people out there who they show what looks like credible science that says we're fine. And so you're saying, no, but I'm right, they're wrong.
Well, there's not very much credible. It looks credible, but it's not credible.
And yeah, may I jump in there? I think it's really difficult as a scientist myself, a trained scientist, to see what's happening with science nowadays, because I think just what Josh mentioned was just a perfect, poignant point. It is that people are actually now saying there's credible science against climate change, and it's not credible. Me as a trained scientist, and I think Josh, you are too, you look at data and it's analyzed a certain way, it's vetted a certain way, but now there's science that's not valid. So it is this kind of ping pong game right now. It's really tough. It's really tough to validate your science when there is invalid science now.
Let's go real quick to Tony.
Yeah, I think there's always this tension between having to decide how much information you want to put out there that is basically alarmist, or people will see it as being alarmist or doomsday-ish. And on the other hand, balancing that with things that are positive, like, for example, examples of people that are changing their lifestyles, those that are have decided to have fewer or no kids, and the benefits of doing so, and so forth. So I think it's really a balance between the two, because I think we really don't know what strategy ultimately will work, given the condition of the world and how quickly, and given the ecological chaos and the radical climate instability that we're looking at. So I think getting back to the idea of having a regular format on Rumble or YouTube would allow people to come in with both perspectives. You can have chats. So Dave, while you're doing this, and you're extremely articulate, so you could both moderate and speak to the issues at the same time. And we can encourage people to go to those chats. But at some point, you can organize a Zoom as well. There's all sorts of new communications technologies on social media. But anyway, I think that it's not a matter of, I think leadership, in part, leadership is ringing the alarm bell. At the same time, if you do it all the time, you do it too frequently. I think that the media is so focused on climate change that you get the impression that it's the only environmental issue.
Sure.
And it drives me crazy to see that. You read, I get my Apple News stream, and everything's about climate, and they have actually things like wildlife and the living beings on the planet subsumed under the section on climate. That's how crazy it's gotten. As if we somehow were able to stabilize the climate, everything would be just fine, and that's obviously not the case. So, again, we have to have ways of having our own media, as you know about the alternative media. There's all kinds of different views about what's actually real and what's unreal out there in terms of politics and the environment. Anyway, but back to the leadership. There's all forms of leadership, and we have the shock troops on the ground. You see demonstrations in terms of stopping the fossil fuel industry. At the same time, we hear people talking about the need for a policy change in Washington D.C. and around the world. So anyway, it's a big issue. What is leadership is a big topic. You could have a special program just on what is environmental leadership in today's context.
Well, I do want to give Josh a chance just to quickly respond to this input, and then I think it's a good idea to move on. But first, Molly, why don't you give us what you wanted to contribute, and then we'll go to Josh.
My request was I wanted to hear what Josh had to say about what does effective leadership look like in an urgent situation, and not philosophically, but practically. What does it look like?
In what context? You mean here now?
In this context here. So it sounds like you feel it's being done ineffectively. So what is it? Let's start with, where do you live?
Manhattan.
Okay. So in Manhattan, what would effective leadership look like to wake people up to the problem that doesn't shove it down their throat? Like, what would you do?
I teach people what's now called the Spodek method, which is a leadership technique to talk to initially one person at a time, but then multiple groups of people to lead them to experientially go through a mindset shift where to go from living sustainably themselves is deprivation and sacrifice, to where they expect that the more they live sustainably, the more that they'll want to live more sustainably. And when they teach others, that the others will respond not with pushing back with argument, but with gratitude, and wanting for them to, the person that they lead to do what we do in the workshop, for them to want to bring them to others. So to share things in a way that when I share it with you, you not only appreciate it and like it and feel gratitude toward me, but then you want to learn to do it to others. That is a recipe for growth.
Okay, so
if I give you facts and lecture, then people generally don't want to share that.
Yeah. If I were one had a tendency to push back on, let's say, stopping using plastics, what would you say to me that would make me say, thank you for sharing that? How would you do that?
I think it's 7 to the hour. I can't answer that in this time. But very broadly speaking, leadership is a performance art. It's something that you don't learn from facts. You learn the way you learn any performance is you play scales, you practice the basics. After you play the scales, then you move up to the more complex scales, and then you move up to the more simple songs, then the more complex songs. Then you play the songs in front of an audience of people that you know. Then eventually you reach Carnegie Hall. Eventually you reach something where you're leading lots and lots of people. If you try to short circuit that, if you go from playing a scale to Carnegie Hall, or you just read books on music appreciation, but not actually do the exercises.
Are you talking about the leader needs to go through those steps?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the world of you, Josh. You're a smart guy, but I'm going to end this part of the conversation by saying I just don't see a real tight connection between what you're teaching and what needs to happen quickly here in the world.
Are you seeing that connection between the message that's going out right now from us?
Well, yeah, there's a tight connection between the message that's going out and what needs to happen. And I'll grant you that we're not being effective, but we don't have time. I mean, if you're standing on the sidewalk in a downtown intersection and the person next to you is getting ready to step off the curb and there's a bus coming down the lane and it's going to kill that person if they step off. You don't have time to tell them a story and be a leader. You need to say, hey, don't step off the curb. There's a bus coming. And that's the situation that we're in today.
Let me know how I can help with the strategies that we have, and I'll do absolutely the best I can.
Okay. I think we're all frustrated, but you haven't convinced me that you have the answer, but I hope you do. I hope you do. Anybody else who hasn't spoken want to pipe in with a suggestion or a question before I go back to Tony? All right, Tony, it's all yours.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that every day I'm really gratified, and I get some hope out of the fact that there are so many people that love life. And I'm not talking about just human life. I mean, if you look on Facebook, you see picture after picture of somebody's experience with some wild animal, or some beautiful photograph of birds in the sunset, or amphibians in somebody's backyard marsh. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And I think there's a huge, for want of a better word, clientele for nature that has yet to be fully explored. I know a lot of people. I mean, I've been around a long time, and I know a lot of people that work for or participate or are members of organizations like National Audubon and so forth, are really defenders of nature, but they are very reluctant to get into politics. And I've always explained to people that, unless you can capture the political decision-making process, you're always going to be at a huge advantage, whether you're talking about some specific, activity that's going to destroy habitat, cut down a bunch of trees, put up a new shopping center or whatever, a new mine or whatever. That's very frustrating. So what I'm saying is I think there's really hope, and I think there's a resource out there, and basically people who love nature and love life, including human beings, obviously, that has yet to reach its full potential as a voice for change. I just want to make that comment because I think sometimes we get feeling pretty down, with almost near crying in our beer, that nothing can change. But I actually see a worldwide movement. There's rights of nature in countries like Ecuador and many others, actually.
Sure.
So there's a movement, an international movement. So I think there is hope. It's just a matter of figuring out ways in which we can get these messages across to the greater society of which we're a part.
Thanks, Tony. I'm happy to stay on as long as there's conversation going, but we may start to lose a few people because we're an hour from when we were supposed to have begun. So if you don't mind me interjecting real quick, I want to just make sure everybody hears a couple of valuable things, and then we can return to kind of a free-for-all. These kind of relate to how can we help, what we can do. Certainly, the campaign could use some money. Your donations aren't wasted. They would go to covering the costs that we're incurring to produce some of this media. And if we were to collect enough donations, we would be able to begin paying to boost posts and videos on YouTube and the like. We could use some doers on the campaign team, so volunteers. If anybody's serious and you have an hour or two a week that you want to give to the campaign, then reach out to me. There's a contact form on the website, or you can email info@davetheplanet2024.com with questions, suggestions, or if you want to volunteer. I've already talked about be our megaphone. Help us infect more people with some awareness of this issue. And Tony, I'm going to think really long and hard about doing something regularly. I'm trying to do the Substack posts and the Dave the Planet podcast regularly, but it's not an appointed time every week, and it's a lot of work. So it would be really hard for me to say every Monday night at 7 I'm going to be on the air, because I've got to do some prep for that. But if that's what it takes, I'm going to see if there's a way I can arrange my life to do that. But more help from some doers would be great. Okay, so back to the free-for-all here. All right, Stephanie.
Well, I just wanted to add to what Tony said too. There is a lot of doom and gloom, a tremendous amount of doom and gloom. there, I think there is something very powerful about the media, things like movies, like Humane, and I don't know if all on this call have seen the Netflix series Don't Look Up, and the premise behind that. But why I mentioned that Don't Look Up is because at the end of that movie, I don't want to be a spoiler. I don't want to have a spoiler alert, but at the end of that movie, they show when everything's going to pot, they show all these incredibly, and I get weepy even actually talking about these incredible, beautiful animals and the earth and the butterflies and the trees. And I think that's really necessary to show in our campaign what we are actually losing. Not only the death and the destruction and the horrificness, the whales getting ran over by cargo ships and dolphins being entangled in fishing net and on, coral reefs being bleached out. Show that, but show what it is prior to, show what we are losing. And I think images like that are going to be super powerful. And I think that they should be connected to the TikTok, connected to the campaign.
Thanks.
I think that's a really good idea, Stephanie, to just keep putting it in front of people, because eventually they'll go, all right, I'll watch it. And it does impact us.
I want to mention that the UK Guardian environment editor a few days ago reached out to as many of the UN IPCC report authors as they could find contact information from, and asked them how they thought we were doing. And they got answers from, I don't know, some 355 or something. And I'm going to do a podcast episode about this, so I don't want to belabor it. But it really brought a tear to my eye to see some of their comments and see that the vast majority of these climate scientists, and it's climate, Tony, but climate seems to be probably the most urgent, but certainly not the only of the crises that make up ecological overshoot. But the climate scientists they told the UK Guardian just how disappointed and depressed they are. Now, you don't see that and hear that in the news day after day. Most people think, I'm going to be on the golf course next week. My kids are going to be graduating from high school next year. Life is going to go on, and it's not going to change. And I think somehow we need to find a way to get more honest news out there, depressing though it may be. Anybody else have anything they want to say? No, maybe we should wrap it up. I'd love your feedback. Let me know how you thought this went. It wasn't exactly the conversation I thought we would have, but I think it was an important conversation, and some good subjects were brought up. And I'll be thinking about this, and I hope that the campaign team members here will be thinking about it. And we'll keep trying to adjust trim our sails and change our course and our tactics to see if we can't make a difference, because that's what this campaign is all about, is to change the conversation and raise more awareness. Thank you, everybody, for being here.